Welcome to True Echo, where untold stories find their voice. In today's powerful episode, we follow the extraordinary journey of Tyrone Wallace, a quiet, principled black veteran who walked into a Georgia courtroom wearing his Bronze Star, only to be told by the presiding judge to remove it before testifying. What started as a moment of quiet defiance would ripple into a national reckoning that would shake the justice system to its core. This isn't just a story about one man, it's about truth, dignity, and what happens when silence becomes strength. Let's begin. The air inside Courtroom 3B of Fulton County Courthouse buzzed with quiet tension. Lawyers flipped through case files, clerks whispered behind desks, and the dull echo of heels against polished floors created an ambient hum of routine. But when Tyrone Wallace stepped through the door, everything shifted slightly. 62 years old, with posture as straight as the flag outside, he wore a navy blue suit so crisp it still held its fold lines. But it wasn't the suit that drew stares, it was the Bronze Star pinned just above his heart. Tyrone wasn't there to make a scene. In fact, he hated scenes. A career Army man who'd retired with little fanfare, he had built his post-service life on quiet integrity, serving his Georgia community with the same devotion he'd shown his country. He took a job at the Parks and Recreation Department, logging equipment, reviewing maintenance budgets, and tracking receipts like lives depended on it. Because, in his mind, they did. He hadn't planned to testify. But when he noticed thousands of dollars going missing, money meant for upgrading parks and making neighborhoods safer, he couldn't look away. He gathered invoices. He cross-checked names. He raised flags, quietly. Eventually, it led to an investigation, and his name landed on the witness list in the case against Councilman Graham Dorsey, a man known for smooth speeches and slick charity events. Tyrone didn't care about politics. He cared about truth. So when the subpoena arrived, he put on his best suit and pinned on the medal he'd earned in Kandahar, not as a statement, but as a memory. He took his first steps down the aisle toward the witness stand. Murmurs fluttered through the room, subtle but sharp. A few jurors glanced up. One young man in a gray sweater gave him a respectful nod. But before Tyrone could take his seat, a voice cut through the air like a gavel. "Mr. Wallace," said Judge Carlton Price, his tone already brittle. "That medal on your chest, I need you to remove it before we begin your testimony." Tyrone blinked. "Excuse me, Your Honor. This courtroom is not the place for personal decorations," Price said. "Remove it, or I will consider your refusal non-compliant." A chill ran through the gallery. Someone gasped. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The defense attorney leaned back, watching the drama unfold. Tyrone kept his stance, calm but firm. "With respect, sir," he said, "that medal isn't for decoration. It's part of me. I earned it. I wear it for those who didn't come home." The judge's jaw tightened. "You're a witness, not a soldier." "I'm both," Tyrone said evenly. "Always have been." Price's face flushed with something, anger, pride, or fear, it wasn't clear. What was clear was his next move. "Bailiff," he said, voice low but lethal, "escort Mr. Wallace out. We're taking a recess." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in stunned disbelief. Tyrone didn't protest. He turned calmly, shoulders back, medal shining defiantly as he exited. He wasn't just walking out of a courtroom. He was walking into history. The hallway outside Courtroom 3B felt too quiet, too sterile, its polished floor reflecting every step, every moment of tension that now hung in the air. Tyrone sat on a wooden bench near a ticking wall clock, its second hand sounding louder than it had any right to. His attorney, Janice Corwin, paced beside him, the sharp click of her heels betraying the fire simmering beneath her calm surface. "I've practiced for 20 years, she muttered, folding and unfolding her arms. "And I've never seen a judge melt down over a medal. Not once." Tyrone didn't respond immediately. His eyes had drifted somewhere distant, somewhere dry, dusty, and far away from the marbled halls of Fulton County. Kandahar. The heat. The gunfire. The voices of men he couldn't bring back. He finally said, "Some folks carry their grief in photos. I carry mine right here." Janice exhaled and sat beside him. "He's going to try to block your testimony," she said. "Claim you're being disruptive. That the medal might bias the jury. It's a scare tactic." Tyrone nodded slowly. "Then I guess they'll have to find the truth without me." But everyone knew they couldn't. Tyrone wasn't just another witness, he was the one who'd uncovered the paper trail. He was the man who double-checked every receipt, flagged ghost contractors, and caught the forged signatures. He didn't go looking for corruption. He just couldn't unsee it once it stared him in the face. Inside the courtroom, murmurs hadn't died down. More than one veteran had shown up quietly, word having spread like wildfire. One wore a Vietnam-era cap. Another clutched a faded photo of a husband lost to service. They didn't shout or protest, they just filled the benches with silent presence. When Judge Price returned 20 minutes later, he looked rattled but resolved. His gavel struck twice. "We will resume testimony without Mr. Wallace," he said. Janice stood immediately. "Your Honor, for the record, my client did not disrupt proceedings." He stood respectfully. He complied with every expectation of courtroom decorum. "That medal is not political. It's a symbol of service." Price narrowed his eyes. "Are you requesting reconsideration?" "I'm requesting you remember why we're here," she snapped back. "A city official stands accused of stealing public funds. My client has first-hand knowledge of how it was done. Whether he wears a medal or a plain tie shouldn't affect that." But Price was unmoved. Motion denied. From behind the closed courtroom door, Tyrone heard every word. Janice walked out moments later, tension etched in her face. "He thinks you'll break," she said. "That if he keeps pushing, you'll show up tomorrow without it." "I won't," Tyrone replied calmly. Janice paused. "Why not?" He looked her in the eye. "Because I've seen that look before. The one that says, respect is only for people who stay quiet. I won't be quiet." That night, the story hit the local news, just a 90-second segment titled, "Courtroom Controversy, Judge Orders Veteran to Remove Medal." But it was enough. The clip showed Tyrone, silent, composed, walking out with the medal on his chest. Comments flooded social media. Most were furious. "My dad wore his Purple Heart to my graduation. No one said a thing. Who does this judge think he is?" By morning, more veterans stood outside the courthouse. Some in uniform. Some in jeans and caps. No chants. No signs. Just presence. Judge Price hadn't seen anything yet. And neither had the rest of the country. Tuesday morning dawned with a weight in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. A humid stillness wrapped around Fulton County Courthouse like a blanket no one asked for. Inside, Courtroom 3B was packed, an unusual sight for a city contract corruption case. Veterans filled the gallery. Some wore dress uniforms. Others had old campaign pins on their collars or small ribbons on their lapels. Each of them had shown up not to speak, but to witness. When Tyrone Wallace stepped through the doors, the energy shifted. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't wear just the Bronze Star either. This time, he had two medals pinned to his suit, the Bronze Star and the Army Commendation Medal ribbon. He walked straight down the center aisle with the same silent dignity he carried in Kandahar, each step echoing like a drumbeat of quiet defiance. Judge Carlton Price entered from his chambers at exactly 9:01, his robe crisp, his jaw tight. He looked out at the full benches and cleared his throat with the authority of a man trying to re-establish control. "We are resuming the case of the People versus Councilman Graham Dorsey," he began. "This courtroom welcomes all respectful observers but will not tolerate disruptions of any kind." Janice Corwin stood instantly, folder in hand. "Your Honor, I renew my motion for Mr. Wallace to testify in full, while wearing his military honors. The medals are not political. They are not inflammatory. They are a reflection of identity, protected under Georgia case precedent, including State v. Redmond. Price scowled. This is not a debate over fashion. We're not debating fashion, Janice shot back. We're debating dignity. A murmur rolled through the gallery. One woman shook her head silently. Another man clenched the bill of his veteran's cap. Everyone waited for the gavel. But instead, the judge's voice cut sharp and cold. Motion denied, Price barked. Mr. Wallace may testify only if he removes the medals. Otherwise, the court will proceed without his statement. At that moment, Tyrone stepped forward. Not hurried. Not hesitant. I'm here to testify, Your Honor, he said. The judge's eyes locked on the medals. Then we're done here, he said coldly. Bailiff. Your Honor, Janice interrupted, voice calm but steel-wrapped, let the record show this court has chosen to exclude a decorated veteran's eyewitness testimony on the basis of visual appearance, not legal merit. That choice will directly impact the strength of the prosecution's case. Judge Price's face twisted. Are you accusing this court of bias? I'm accusing this court, Janice said, her voice ringing now, of elevating ego above justice. There was a beat of silence. Then, a man in the gallery stood. No words, just a silent, respectful rise. Then another. And another. Within seconds, nearly a dozen veterans were standing in silent witness. They didn't speak. They didn't protest. They just stood. The judge slammed his gavel. This is not a forum for protest. They're not protesting, Janice said quietly. They're witnessing. Judge Price looked around, his authority unraveling faster than his words. Then, with a deep breath and a visible flinch, he declared, this court is in recess until further notice. And he walked out. Outside, the steps of the courthouse buzzed with press and murmurs. Reporters rushed Janice. Is Mr. Wallace planning to sue? Will the trial resume? What now? She answered one question. We didn't come here to make noise. We came here to tell the truth. And if a judge won't allow that truth, then maybe he's the one who doesn't belong on the bench. Inside, Tyrone stood at a second-floor window, looking down at the growing crowd. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But he didn't need to. The silence was speaking now. By Wednesday morning, Tyrone Wallace's name was no longer confined to Fulton County, it was trending across the South. He didn't know because he'd never touched Twitter, and he still called YouTube that website with all the guitar lessons. But his story had traveled without him. Clips of him walking calmly out of Courtroom 3B had been slowed down, set to piano music, and shared with captions like "This is what dignity looks like." At his small brick home in Columbus, Tyrone sat on his porch sipping black coffee, the same way he had every morning since retiring from the army. But now, reporters staked out half a block down. News vans parked discreetly, at first. Then not so discreetly. Inside, Janice paced the kitchen. She'd come to deliver updates in person. They want you for an interview, she said. CNN. MSNBC. Even a conservative talk radio station. No, Tyrone said simply. You sure? She asked. Because whether you want to or not, you've become the face of something. I didn't ask for a face, he muttered. I just wanted to speak. She nodded. And because you wouldn't stay silent, people are finally listening. The court remained frozen. Judge Price refused to return to the bench, issuing no further comment. But something had shifted beyond his control. People began to dig, reporters, legal analysts, veterans groups. And what they found made things worse. A former intern of Price, Michelle Hargrave, posted on Facebook, he used to brag that he didn't take orders from people who wore boots. I never understood what he meant, until now. The post went viral. Then came the audio. It was leaked to a local paper by someone inside the courthouse. A short recording from the morning before Tyrone was scheduled to testify, in which Judge Price was clearly heard saying, "If he walks in here with that medal like he owns the place, I'll shut him down. I don't care what he served. This is my court." The backlash exploded. Veteran organizations flooded the Judicial Review Board with formal complaints. Lawyers went on cable news calling it a textbook example of judicial bias. Even Councilman Dorsey, the man on trial, issued a statement condemning the judge's behavior as a distraction from the real matter at hand. Back in Tyrone's kitchen, Janice placed a fresh letter on the table. "This is from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division," she said. "They're opening an inquiry. Ethics violations. Civil rights infractions. Judicial conduct review." Tyrone didn't touch the letter. He just looked at it like it belonged to someone else's story. "I didn't expect all this," he said quietly. "But it needed to happen," Janice replied. "And it started because you wouldn't back down." Within days, more people stepped forward. A former prosecutor under Price said he'd heard similar remarks. Then an old paralegal shared a story of the judge snapping at a disabled veteran who'd asked to testify while seated. The man had said, "This court doesn't make allowances for drama." For years, no one had said anything. Now, the silence was over. One morning, a plain PDF file arrived anonymously at a local journalist's inbox. It contained a transcript, 43 pages long, of internal courtroom conversations. In it, Price spoke about Tyrone with clear disdain. On page 7, "That damn medal better stay in his drawer." By week's end, the Fulton County Courthouse had gone from routine to radioactive. Judge Carlton Price was now the story. Not the case. Not the corruption. Him. And in that truth was the twist no one saw coming. Tyrone Wallace didn't have to raise his voice to break the silence. He only had to keep standing. By Friday, the state of Georgia found itself on the edge of a reckoning. The Judicial Review Board issued a rare midweek bulletin stating they were reviewing all media, transcripts, and personnel testimony regarding Judge Carlton Price. They hadn't yet decided on formal disciplinary measures, but they weren't ruling anything out either. In Columbus, Tyrone continued living like it was any other week. He fixed a loose shutter. He watered the azaleas. He declined every interview request, even from major national outlets. To him, the real story had never been about a judge, or a medal, it was about the truth, and the quiet wars so many people fought just to be heard with dignity. Still, he couldn't avoid the wave. Neighbors brought over pies and letters. A woman dropped off a pin that had belonged to her late husband, a Korean War veteran. Children left hand-drawn cards in his mailbox, "Thank you for standing up." Janice filtered every call. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates and media alerts. "You've become a symbol," she told him one morning, watching as Tyrone repaired a screen door with a pocket toolkit. "They're calling this the courtroom code break. A lot of people who've been told to sit down are suddenly standing." Tyrone didn't look up. "I didn't break anything. I just didn't bend." Inside the courthouse, the unraveling continued. All hearings under Judge Price's docket were postponed or reassigned. His chambers remained locked, his statements limited to a single line, "We are cooperating with inquiries and have no further comment." But behind the scenes, the machine was grinding. Former clerks began to whisper, about how he spoke to them, how he treated anyone who wore a badge or served in uniform with veiled contempt. A private investigator arrived, hired by the Federal Ethics Office. Quiet meetings were held. Doors closed. Files pulled. The final blow came like a slow, rolling wave. One after another, major news outlets ran exposés. In one infamous 2019 case, Jenkins versus Hartwell, Price had forced a veteran to remove a simple service pin during a wrongful termination hearing. In another, he allowed a witness to wear a crucifix necklace, but denied a former Marine the right to remain seated during sworn testimony due to a leg injury. The pattern wasn't random. It was deliberate. Legal analysts pounced. "This is no longer about courtroom neutrality," said one on national TV. "This is about personal bias wrapped in a robe." On the steps of the state capitol in Atlanta, the Georgia American Veterans Coalition held a press conference. "This isn't about protocol," a retired Marine declared. "It's about respect. And if someone can't testify in court without having to erase part of who they are, then we've got a broken courtroom." Back in Columbus, Tyrone watched from his living room, the sound on low. He didn't comment. He didn't nod. But when the speaker on TV said, "Tyrone Wallace showed more courage in silence than most men do in battle," something in his eyes flickered. He wasn't proud. He was grounded. Then came the final, unceremonious blow. On Monday morning at exactly 8 a.m., the Georgia Judicial Review Board issued a single-line update on its public docket. Judge Carlton Price has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. No press conference. No apology. No final words from the man who'd silenced so many others. The gavel had finally fallen, without a sound. Janice called Tyrone immediately. "He's gone," she said. "It's done." Tyrone didn't respond right away. He let the words breathe. Then he said quietly, "That's something I didn't think I'd hear." She added, "He resigned before they could rule." That tells you everything. Outside the courthouse, reporters stood by in respectful silence. Notebooks in hand. No shouting. No chase. Because for once, the story had already spoken for itself. 2 days after the resignation, a different kind of gathering took place. There were no cameras. No podium. No chants or dramatic headlines. Just a folding table, a half-circle of plastic chairs, and the faint scent of coffee and old carpet inside the Veterans Resource Center of Columbus. Tyrone had agreed to speak, on one condition: no national press, no spectacle, just locals, veterans, students, and anyone who genuinely cared to listen. He arrived in a simple gray shirt and slacks, not a trace of military regalia. Not because he was retreating, but because the point had already been made. He stood in front of the small group, his voice steady, his presence unmistakable. "I wasn't trying to make a point," Tyrone said. "I was trying to tell the truth. I didn't walk into that courtroom thinking I'd be a headline. I walked in thinking I'd be a witness. That's it." He glanced around the room, young and old, silent and attentive. But some people don't like when the truth shows up wearing boots or medals or memory. They try to strip it down. Mute it. Make it sit quietly in the corner. And if you let them, they'll succeed. He paused, then looked down at his hands, still calloused, still solid. "I didn't wear that medal for applause. I wore it because it reminds me who I am, and who I lost. It's not for show. It's for respect. And if that's too much for a courtroom, maybe the courtroom needs fixing. Not me." A hush swept over the room. Not from tension. From understanding. A teenage boy in the front row, barely old enough to shave, raised his hand. "Were you scared?" he asked. "To lose your chance to speak?" Tyrone locked eyes with the boy. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting," he said. "And I knew if I took it off, if I shrunk myself to fit someone else's idea of acceptable, then the words wouldn't matter anyway." After the event, one by one, veterans stood to shake his hand. Some had tears in their eyes. One woman gave him a tiny brass pin. "My father wore it every day after Korea," she said. "It belongs with someone who gets it." Tyrone stayed until the last handshake, then quietly returned home. That night, he sat on his porch, sipping water, listening to the night breeze and distant sprinklers. No reporters. No headlines. Just peace. Janice called him later. The city issued an official statement. He didn't answer. She read it aloud anyway. We thank Mr. Wallace for his commitment to truth and service. His actions have reminded us that dignity has a place in every room, including the courtroom. Tyrone finally smiled. Just a little. They're saying the right things, Janice added. He shook his head. I didn't move anything, he said. I just didn't budge. And sometimes, that's what causes everything else to shift. 3 weeks after the resignation, Courtroom 3B opened its doors once again. Same hardwood benches. Same high ceilings. But everything felt different. The air didn't carry tension, it carried anticipation. The trial of Councilman Graham Dorsey had resumed, this time under a new judge, Bernice Rollins, a seasoned jurist known for fairness and calm control. The gallery filled early. Veterans returned, not in protest this time, but in quiet solidarity. A few held small flags. Others simply watched with folded hands. Even the bailiffs seemed different, less robotic, more alert to the moment's weight. At 9 o'clock sharp, Judge Rollins entered. She looked directly at the courtroom and said, "This court welcomes all with respect and dignity. Mr. Wallace, you may approach." Tyrone stood and walked down the center aisle again. No medals today. Just the same navy blue suit, same polished boots, and the same posture that didn't need an accessory to speak volumes. "Thank you for your service," Judge Rollins said softly. "You may proceed with your full testimony." And with that, the moment that had been delayed by ego, by bias, by silence, finally arrived. Tyrone took the stand. He spoke clearly, methodically. No embellishments. No emotion. Just receipts, supplier names, invoices, dates, and forged signatures. He walked the court through how fake contractors siphoned funds meant for playground equipment and public lights, how it wasn't just money that disappeared, but trust. Councilman Dorsey didn't make eye contact. He stared at his hands the entire time. When the prosecutor asked one final question, "Mr. Wallace, why did you choose to come forward?" Tyrone didn't hesitate. "Because it wasn't just numbers on a page," he said. "It was a promise to families, to neighborhoods. My wife used to bring kids from our street to that park. Some of them are grown now. I couldn't stay quiet knowing someone had stolen from their future." The room was still. Not heavy. Full. That afternoon, Tyrone left without a word. No cameras followed. He didn't linger. He simply walked out with the same dignity he walked in with. But later that day, he made a quiet detour, to South Lumpkin Park. It looked different now. The splash pad had finally been installed. New benches lined the path. He sat down and watched two kids toss a frisbee near the fence. They laughed loudly, freely. Unaware of the battle that had been fought in a courtroom so that space could remain theirs. He thought of Angela. She would have hated the spotlight, but she would have been proud. "Dignity doesn't ask for attention," she used to say. "It earns it by showing up." Days later, Tyrone received another letter, this one from a high school teacher in Macon. "My students have followed your story. They want to hear what it means to stand up. Would you come speak?" At first, he said no. Then, the teacher sent a note handwritten by a student, "What if we need to wear something one day that they try to take off?" So he went. He stood in the middle of a high school gymnasium in a plain gray shirt and jeans, hands at his sides, no script. And he looked at a sea of young faces hungry to understand what it really meant to resist, not with fists, but with presence. "You'll be asked one day," he said, "to stay quiet when you know something's wrong. And it won't always come as yelling. Sometimes, it'll sound like policy. Or decorum. Or rules that were written just to keep certain people small." He paused, then looked directly at them. "You don't have to yell to resist. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can do, is stay exactly who you are when someone tells you that you shouldn't. A girl in the back raised her hand. But what if they don't listen? Tyrone smiled, calm, certain. They might not, he said. But they'll remember. And sometimes, remembering is what makes people change. That night, back on his porch, Tyrone didn't read the latest headlines. He didn't answer the dozens of texts from politicians and public figures now calling him a hero. Instead, he sat under the Georgia stars with a glass of water, the air still and warm. No noise. No fanfare. Just a man who did what he came to do. Because respect isn't something you demand. It's something you live. Tyrone Wallace didn't shout. He didn't protest. He didn't beg to be heard. He simply stood his ground when the system asked him to shrink, and in doing so, he reminded us all that sometimes, the loudest message is the one carried in silence. The kind of silence that demands change, not through force, but through truth. As Tyrone said, sometimes, not budging is what causes everything else to shift. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe to True Echo. Because stories like these deserve to be heard, and your voice helps make that possible.